name is David Mattern from Cattleya Garden, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about coppicing and pollarding. So coppicing and pollarding is a pruning technique to cutting a woody shrub or tree down to the ground to encourage new whippy growth. So coppicing is pruning all the way down at the ground level, and pollarding is leaving a bit of a stem and cutting back to that stem every year. So this is an example of pollarding in the garden. This is Ascanius golden spirit, with the new growth having that nice chartreuse foliage. So pollarding, you have a certain level of trunk. It can be any size. It can be single or multiple trunked. This one's multi-trunked. I'm pruning it at the height of the wall to kind of keep it in scale. You'll often see that a lot in the landscape and in the garden. For the reason for coppicing and pollarding is to kind of keep things in scale with the garden. So what I'm doing here is I will prune all of the new growth back to the stumps every winter. So in the wintertime, it's just part of our winter pruning regime. And you can see all the new growth that's starting to come out now in the spring. So this is an example of coppicing in the garden that we do. So this is another Cattleya Aria royal purple with the purple foliage to it. So this hasn't been cut back in the winter time, but typically what we'll do is we'll cut it back to the ground every year, and this is last year's new growth. So Carla's letting this reshoot up so you have more of the architecture and the height, but you can cut it completely to the ground. But what you can see is at the base, it starts to get sort of that knobbly base from cutting it back every year, and you can already see the new growth is starting to arise from there. Typically, again, like pollarding, when you start to see the new growth coming up, you kind of want to be a little selective about it, selectively pruning out some of those shoots. I would estimate personally about 25% of those out, because you want nice architecture shoots coming out. You don't want it to get a little too crowded. Another tree that we have in the garden, this is Cattleya Aria, a bit of a tongue twister. And Aria, the cultivar is known for that bright chartreuse foliage. So down by the ponds, Joe will coppice this. It's really a combination of coppicing and pollarding, because he'll cut it at the base, a few at the base, and he'll cut, you can see some of the cuts here of pollarding, to get it to reflush every year. So one of the benefits to doing that, both in keeping these plants in scale, but by coppicing or pollarding these catalpas, it actually spurs the leaves to grow a little bit bigger. They're in more of like a juvenile state. The leaves get bigger, the leaves get brighter, and so you have that effect of that bright golden foliage, even more overemphasized in the garden in contrast to all the other plantings in the garden. So in the vegetable garden here, we're repurposing willow and Cattleya to create these wattles that make these raised beds in the garden. It's a nice way of repurposing that material because they're long shoots that emerge as a result of pollarding and coppicing. So all this is I just took the thicker branches, the bases of those, pounded them into the ground on 1 foot increments, and then it's just a very simple basket weave, just in and out the whole way. You can use these for hurdles, you can use them for raised beds, which is kind of like what I'm doing here, or they can just be nice partitions between beds and walking space. But it's a fun way to repurpose the material that you have in the garden that you're generating in winter pruning, and can kind of persist into the garden. So because of pollarding and coppicing, it's usually 1 to 2 years worth of growth. It's not very strong, so these will only last about 1 to 2 years in the garden, which is perfectly fine because I coppice every year, so I always get fresh material. So think about that. That's another aspect of pollarding and coppicing that can make it kind of fun and a little bit more dynamic in your own garden.